I want to introduce you right now to my favorite preacher. And, not only is he a preacher, but he's a cowboy. And I was fascinated with that when I first went to the Chino Valley Family Church and heard Pastor Lee Shaw preach. And I'd never met, of course I'd met cowboys, but I'd never met a preacher who was also a cowboy until I met Lee Shaw. And Brother Lee, I'm so glad to have you here with me to talk about your ministry and your past. And, we were talking, I was just mentioning here, this beautiful teenage girl who was killed in Colombia. Now, you were a missionary back when you were young.
Yes.
Way back when you were young. So tell us a little bit about that. How, you've been steeped in Christianity all your life, and you've been working for the kingdom all your life. So you've got a good story to tell, and we want to hear it on the Creation Quarter.
Well, I have. I've been in ministry, around and in ministry, clear back to my earliest memories. Probably behind my dad on a platform somewhere at 4 years of age, forward. My dad was a great missionary, church planner. That was his whole life. And of course, as kids, there were 5 of us, 4 boys and 1 girl, grew up in that environment. No matter where we were at, lived in a lot of different places, very rural areas, urban areas, moved a lot. In fact, a lot of people that I meet ask me where I grew up, and it's a difficult thing to answer for the most part because I'm like a military kid. We lived in so many different places. All of that changed in fall of 77. We moved to Guatemala, and when I was 14, and our whole life, my dad's ministry, our life as a family completely changed. It was a lifelong dream of my dad's from Bible school, and he did not realize it until he was well past 30 years of age. There's a long story of how he eventually got there. And anyway, the Lord did a tremendous work through him, but first in him as a result of going to the field. And those years really, really did change and affect all of us boys. And my youngest sister, who was born not in Guatemala, Dad eventually moved to Honduras, where she was born. And all of our family, I was the oldest, so I got there the latest. But the rest of them were pretty much raised there. I finished high school, middle and high school. My wife, who's here with us today in the studio, she as well. We met in Bible school, both of us preparing for ministry, and with thoughts and aspirations of doing missions work, which we did do and realize. And my wife, she spent a year in Peru when she was 16, and had a desire to return to the mission field. And it was kind of neat the way the Lord arranged all that, because we met, both of us desiring to return to Guatemala, which neither of us never went there to work. We did end up going there eventually. But that was something that drew us together, that commonality of missions, which we both were able to serve in together separately as teenagers. And then after we met and married in Bible school, spent 4 years with my parents, who eventually moved from Guatemala to Honduras. We spent 4 years in the highlands of Honduras, up in the mountains, different places, and in the back country. In fact, pretty rugged country. She's quite a gal to have followed us. I mean, we lived in adobe huts and concrete and dirt floors, and
what? No air conditioning?
In the middle, no air conditioning.
What?
In the middle of
Man, she's rugged.
Oh, she was.
Yeah,
she was quite a gal.
There's not too many women put up with that kind of
But
stuff.
anyway, so yeah, the missions thing has been a part of our life, all of our lives. As a boy growing up, we lived way out. We were even way out from some of the places we lived. You rarely saw Americans. I grew up in that kind of an environment.
So you learned Spanish right away, I'm sure.
Learned Spanish right away.
Got there.
Absolutely.
And how did you relate to the Hondurans and the Guatemalans that you were missioning, that you were there to evangelize?
You know, when you're that age, the way I was raised, my dad and mother were not religious. They had a relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that wasn't just portrayed in a church building, it was in our home.
Yes.
And we were taught to honor God and know that He would take care of us, and we watched that firsthand. And as a result of that, when it came time to go somewhere and Dad said, I really felt led of the Lord to do this, it never crossed our mind, in all honesty, never crossed our minds to ever question that. None of us kids. We followed, not just willingly, we followed because this is what we're doing. And so we were part of Mom and Dad's ministry. All of us were musical. All of us loved the rural lifestyle. We loved, being in the back country together as a family. We were a tight unit as a home. The music really pulled us together. My dad's love for God and reaching people with that God, that was always a part. So as far as the people were concerned, that was just a natural thing that happened. All of us boys, to this day, every single one of us have wonderful memories. All of us have returned numerous times to visit and to have continued to be a part in some form or another with what really had a part in shaping us as young men. And my sister, of course, is a young woman. She's actually married to a Mexican man who she met while serving in a missions trip in southern Mexico. Tremendous guy. They have 3 children. They now live in Atlanta. He's involved in some kind of technical business, fancy signage of some sort, and Marcos. And so yeah, it had a tremendous impact. And so how did it teach us to relate to them? We love them to this day. My brother Caleb, he's the youngest of us 4 boys. We were the first 4. He's married to a Honduran gal, Fatima. They actually live with us here in Prescott now. He loves Arizona. And so Caleb is married to Fatima. I was very close to her dad. Years ago when Jackie and I were very young, he and I did a lot of crusades all over the mountains of Honduras, back in towards Guatemala and El Salvador. Tremendous, tremendous evangelist. Did a lot of music together. He was well known before he was a Christian and in the music scene. And then when he came to the Lord, he actually came to the Lord in jail. He was quite a character. Wow. Yeah. Wow. And when he gave his life to the Lord, anyway, I got to know Victor very well. He since has gone to be with the Lord, and my brother's actually married to his daughter. She is Honduran. So our connections are tight still with that part of the country and those people. We love them.
Excellent.
You bet.
Now, when you say you were all musical, does that mean you kids were the worship band in Dad's church?
We were, yes, that. We grew up playing bass, guitar, piano, you name it. We were all involved in some form of worship. Okay. My younger brother, the 2 oldest boys, myself and Steve, when we were 16 and 14, we actually started playing the guitar together and singing in a duo, and did quite a bit of traveling mostly in the backcountry of Guatemala, and in a lot of the little Indian churches and whatnot, and had a little bit of a following at that time, and just a really, really special time. We're going to be going to the first family reunion that is under my dad, the immediate family, and that's one of his requests, is that we pull out our old classical guitars and what they call a requinto, which is a higher tuned classical style guitar with a cutaway, which plays a lead, very Latin, very Spanish lead guitar over a second backup guitar, and then singing in a duo form. He wants us to pull that out and do like we did back when we were kids.
You're gonna be able to pull that off, are you?
Absolutely. We're both working on it, so we'll make it happen.
That's great. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I do now remember that you do play guitar occasionally in the worship band.
I do.
Church. Yeah. That's great. So now you were going. Let me see if I get this right. You're going to small villages around the countryside, and you're preaching, or you're individually speaking to people that you find there about Christ?
All of those things. We did, it's a long story how we got through it. We did small, what we called evangelistic crusades, campaigns. We'd set up a tent, like a small circus tent. We did a lot of what we called, I guess you would call, seed meetings. In other words, we'd have little meetings in homes or little outdoor settings, and then eventually we would pull together people in a tent. And this is many, many years ago. One of the places that we lived at lastly before I returned to the States to go to Bible school, in fact, it was where I preached the first time as a teenager, was in a little place where there was no church, out past a town called Tejutla. Beyond it was another little town. I remember the first time we went back there, we went ahead of our vehicle with sledgehammers and shovels to beat away out on the creek bed to get back into where we had some of these services. And there was a little lady back there that was a true woman of God, had been saved as a young girl, and lived in an area where there were no churches, and it was her dream to see a church in that area. And the Lord gave her a vision. My dad did not realize this until later. Gave her a vision and opened her eyes up, and she saw, I can't remember now whether it was an angel or the Lord in her perception, but began to drop roses on a piece of ground that was above their property in this little, it wasn't really a town, it was just kind of a scatter of houses like a hamlet called Armenia. Anyway, long story short, we ended up having, cutting a lot out for time's sake, wound up having a small tent crusade there, saw a real response from the people. Jumping forward now, that was the first church in that area. One of our first converts was a man who was known to be a little bit crazy at that time, Laudo. Nothing against long hair, but in that area it was very strange, and he had a lot of problems. Little bit of a problem guy in the area, alcoholic, and believe it or not, clear back in there, a drug issue, and hair clear down his back. Laudo was our first convert. So jumping forward now, all these years later, we're talking 40 years ago. The last time that we were there to actually visit would have been in the late 90s, and of course we've heard reports and updates, friends of ours that still serve down there. That first church that Dad helped start, Laudo, our first convert, he now is, at that time, he was the presbyter of over 30 churches in that area.
Wow.
And one of them was running at that time over 1,100 people, full of the power of God, changed lives, complete, total change of a whole area. Just an incredible example of fruit that remains. My dad was anything but a showman or somebody that needed to be in front. He did what he did, quite frankly, very tentatively, but he had such a love for God and for those people, and knew that the gospel, the power of the gospel, is what makes the difference. It's what Paul said in Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth. Yeah. And he believed that. And we saw, starting with Laudo, a man who was completely, say what you want about religion, a man who was completely delivered in an instant from alcoholism, a man who never looked back, a man whose life was completely changed. People in that area, when they saw the change in him, drew their interest to the simple message, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. And to see that, Romans 5:17 that says that death reigned by one. People like Laudo, he was alive, but he was dead. And he came to life in Jesus. And Romans 5:17 says that death reigned by one. But for those who receive the abundance of the gift of righteousness, the abundance of righteousness and grace, these will reign in life. And the abundance of grace, and the gift of righteousness, these will reign in life. And to see lives change like that, you can imagine the impact it had not only on the community, but on us kids in the home and in our futures.
That's what it's all about. See, transformed lives for Jesus.
Absolutely.
It's very amazing.
Absolutely.
All right, so how well were you received? Was there a lot of converts?
In Guatemala, that was a very, very special time. Guatemala was in many people that were adults in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s might remember. National Geographic had an article that talked about that being some of the bloodiest years in Central America. It's a very fearful time to live. One of the things that drove us out of the back country was the guerrilla warfare that was going on. In fact, our beloved Tehutla, our home there, we eventually had to leave that area due to the fighting going on between the communist guerrillas who were embedded back in the mountains. They weren't in that area when we first went up there. It was one of the few areas where there was just total peace, and a wonderful area. But eventually the turmoil reached us. It got dangerous enough that we ended up having to leave and get into an area that was more protected. At any rate, I forgot your question.
Is that why you went to Honduras? Because of the conflict?
No, it wasn't. Oh, that's right. No, we did not. In fact, my dad was involved with a ministry in Guatemala that grew quite large, and he ended up being a spearhead for that ministry into Honduras. He really felt led of the Lord to go and kind of replicate what he had seen happen in Guatemala happen in Honduras, which is what happened. Tremendous ministry started there. They were there 18 years. He is known he himself would not readily mention this, but he is known as the father of the Honduran revival of the 80s. Back to what you'd mentioned before, the 80s were very, very scary times, very rough times, fearful times. And yet it also caused there to be a great, great response to the gospel. And now I remember what we were talking about. How were we received? The people, it was incredible, the reception by the people, no matter where we went. Those years in the early 80s, not just our ministry, but you can talk to just about anybody that was there doing true Bible evangelism. The response during the 80s was absolutely incredible. There was a poll that was done, I don't know, it's been a number of years ago now, that showed that close to 60% of the population in Guatemala at that time were evangelical Christians, not just the broad brush term of Christians, but were evangelical Christians. And a large part of those were referenced to Spirit-filled. So, and Guatemala still has, although it has lots of problems, like many of those third world countries, there is a powerful, powerful church in Guatemala to this day as a result of what happened during the late 70s, early 80s. So, tremendous response to the gospel.
So there's more of an evangelical presence than there is Catholic presence there?
I wouldn't say that, well, it depends on where you go. That would actually be true in a lot of areas. I've heard many testimonies of that. That is not the case in just about any other Central or Latin American country. I'm sure there are areas in Guatemala where you still see that dynamic that has been there throughout, quite a bit of their history. But Guatemala is very distinct in that it is tremendously changed as a result of the revivals in the 80s.
That's great.
So, yeah.
Hey, pray for revival.
Absolutely. We need it here. You bet.
Yes, and well, I know there's lots of stories you could tell us about the missionary work that you were doing there. Your whole family was there, and your dad, I'm sure, was a very godly man doing that. But we're going to have to move on. But I do want, before we move on, that this was supported by the Assemblies of God Church?
No, it was not. My dad, that was part of the story that I left out, and I don't know how to shorten it, except to say that the group that he was with originally was a large denomination that kept, for different reasons, putting him off from going to the field. Every time it would come up to vote, my dad was very talented. He had a great ability to start churches. They wanted him to do that, and they kept putting him off. And finally, he, in 1977, he said, with or without your permission, I'm going to obey God. And when he did that, they jerked his licensing and ordination, and we left with an old Colorado cowboy from western Colorado with 2 pickups, and drove for 4 months in the U.S., most of the western U.S., visiting little churches to pick up personal support, and then headed down to a mission homestead that he had built back up in the pines of the high country of Guatemala with the Mom Indians.
Where did he find his support then?
Him? Or
Dad?
From those people. That was the original. At some point, my dad moved away from that denominational setting, and the group that had begun together around us, they once again gave my dad the left foot of fellowship, and we found ourselves in 1980, again without support. We traveled back to the States, and Dad literally, with the few connections that he had and some people that knew him, began to raise support that had seen the product of his ministry, vouched for him, and literally raised individual support as an independent ministry and minister. He eventually started what today in Honduras now is a very widely and well-known ministry called Tree of Life Ministries, and a plan for children and their education in Honduras called Plan Escalon, which continues there to this day. They were on the field for a total of 22 years.
Okay. I'm starting to get the picture now. I think I know why you're such a rebel rouser. Your dad was the same way, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
He absolutely was.
Okay, I'm getting it now. I'm getting the picture. All right. So now you started my favorite church in this area. It's it's the Chino Valley Family Church. And tell us how that started and how that came about.
Well, my wife and I, when we were dating, we both were under the idea and the pressure that because we had come from kind of a missions background, that was where we had to be. And by no means am I saying that I regret returning to the field with my wife, because we had 4 wonderfully productive years. But both of us loved this part of the country. We spent quite a bit of time out here in the Southwest when I was younger, part of my dad's work in church planning for the original denomination that he worked for, the one that gave him the boot. And at any rate, we had just a real love for this guy. I remember she and I, when we were dating, I showed her some of my Arizona Highways magazines, and I've always loved horses, had horses since I was young, been around cattle, loved that whole thing. She was born and raised in Texas, and we always wanted to come to Arizona, but we put that on the back burner. We figured anything, with our old way of thinking, we figured anything that we wanted probably wasn't what God wanted. You know, God, if you say yes to God, He's going to send you to New Guinea and make you eat maggots and do crazy. And it was a concept that was erroneous. We didn't know that God leads us. There is a scripture in the book of Psalms that says that He gives us the desires of our heart. If we trust Him, and put our lives in His hand, He will. And I began to realize that God does not make us do things. If we have a relationship with Him, and you see this playing out in the Bible, especially now with the work of Jesus. He now lives within us by His Spirit, and He's not out here dragging us around places we don't want to go. He puts within us desires and longings. Jeremiah 29:11 more than alludes to that. He has a hope and a future for us.
Yes.
And He has thoughts of good things. So anyway, this is my point.
Do you remember the question?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Are we going to get there somewhere?
It's huge. We are. So here's the deal. With this in mind, we kept putting away coming to Arizona for years as a married couple. We went to Honduras. I worked on ranches in western Kansas and helped in churches there. And we ended up moving to Florida, of all places. We spent 13 years in Florida because we felt like that's where God wanted us to be. And it's the last place on earth I would ever want to be, in Central Florida.
You were a cowboy in Florida.
I worked on a 50,000 acre cow-calf operation there, commercial cow-calf operation, 6 days a week on a horse. There, the same as here. And all those years in Florida, always our heart's desire was Arizona. But we thought, there's no way, that's our desire. How could that be God's desire? One day, Psalms 37:4 and 5 got through to me, which says, delight yourself in the Lord and He will give you the desires of your heart. And I began to say, Lord, is it possible? Long story short, one thing led to another. We began to put feelers out, and I've never seen anything so supernatural, just open right and left. My wife, we made a trip out here with our boys because I wanted her to see this place that I love so much. she'd heard so much about. The minute we crossed over, she felt like she had come home, began to cry. She's never, she's been that way since, never looked back. But in all that we had done, the last thing on earth that I wanted to do, we were involved in starting a church in Florida. As I said, we were there almost 13 years. I had quite an influence in the cowboy community with our church there, and there's a lot I could talk about that. But when we came out here, the last thing I wanted to do was be involved in starting another church. The responsibilities, when we left there, God opened up the doors and we came here. We met another couple that joined us from Northern California that they were common friends from the Bible school that we'd gone to together in Oklahoma. It's a long story. They moved out here with us and they said, whatever you do, we want to be a part of it. And I said, well, I'm not starting a church. We got involved in some of the local ranches. I got involved in construction, day working on ranches around here. And for the first 2 years, no matter what we tried to do, we just could not seem to find, I'm not saying anything against the fellowships here, but it seemed like whenever we went, they were in the middle of a transition or the pastor had just left. It was just the way it was when we moved here 16 years ago. And so one thing led to another, and finally I just said, honey, I'm tired of looking. We're just going to have church in our home. And we got out the guitar, our boys, the other couple that was with us. One thing led to another, and our Bible study, as it became to be, started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we had to move into somebody else's house with a bigger living room. And the whole time I'm dragging my feet. We're working on these places. We got into ranch roping competition. In fact, the buckle that I have on today is one that I won in 2006, and went over to California and won a deal over there and set an arena record with my buddy, and we were just having a great time. The last thing
was that rodeo? Were you doing rodeo at that time?
What you would think of as rodeo? It was more. It was competition roping, called ranch roping.
Wow,
yeah, a rodeo of sorts. Yeah. And so at any rate, the last thing I wanted to do was start a church. Long story short, when we had moved here, the way the Lord opened up doors for us to move here, the house that we found when we arrived here, when it was about impossible to find a place, we were actually coming back from Phoenix. I had a moving truck full of all of our stuff. We were being charged on a daily basis for what was in there. No place to live. We just moved here because we felt like this is what God had for us, and we were excited. This is here in Chino. Long story short, went down. I had to get rid of the stuff. So I took the last of our money, put it in storage, took the truck to Phoenix, dropped it off, came back with my friend. When we were on our way back, I felt instructed, turn left. At that time, I didn't know I was outer loop. I said, turn here. Dave says, why? This is the way to where we're staying. I said, no, turn left here. We made a left, went up to Reed Road. I said, make a right on this Reed Road. We went down just a little ways. I'm trying to shorten this as much as I can, but this is the miracle. This is where things started. And I noticed a trailer house that looked like it was empty. We were desperate. Pulled off. There was an older gentleman, which turned out to be his granddaughter. I said, sir, is this place for rent? He says, you know, it's funny that you ask. He said, I own 4 properties. I just came back from the bank. He said, on my way down, I noticed some people looked like they were getting ready to move. They had 2 big horse trailers full of stuff. He said, on my way back, they had a sign beat into the ground with handwriting, for rent. Make a long story short, we said thank you, couldn't believe our ears, headed straight to where that house was at, pulled into the driveway. People were working feverishly. They were moving to Missouri, and stood there and talked for a little bit. And the lady of the house, who acted very, very strange the whole time, she's looking at us like she'd seen a ghost, David and I. She finally stopped, pointed a finger in both of our faces, and she said, I had a dream last night. And you're going to think I'm crazy. She's shaking and crying. She said, I dreamed last night and I saw you 2 young men pull up in that car. She said, I've been watching for you all day long. I thought I'd had too much pizza or something. And then she said to me, she said, are you here to start a church? And I said, oh, no. No, I'm not here to start a church. I'm not here to start a church. She says, well, I don't understand that. She said, but this house is yours. We ended up finding out that the man that owned that house in California was a believer. She told him her story, not ours, her story. He gave us the house at the current rent, locked it in, no deposit. We had horses, by the way. This was the bigger mess.
Oh.
We had horses. We had 4 horses with us. That had a hay barn, horse corrals, horse. We ended up renting there for $900 a month with all of that right on Butterfield Road.
Wow.
My wife got a job ahead of 40 plus applicants. I wish I had time to tell you the story. Absolutely miraculous. One thing led to another. Back to the living room. I got to the place where I could no longer drag my feet. Finally, one day, we had to rent a space, and that became Chino Valley Family Church. And it goes back, there are so many stories like that I could tell you, but God's hand was truly in the establishing of that church, and we have been so blessed to have founded it. I have recently turned the lead pastorship over to a guy that was mentored and brought up in our ministry, Chad Nanke, doing a tremendous job carrying forward our message of grace that we believe so strongly in. And it's been just a tremendous, I'll tell you what, in all that we saw in the mission field, what we saw right here in Chino Valley, and stories that I could spend another hour talking about, changed lives. If you go to that church and you walk around as you have, you will see one person after another that has been brought out of all kinds of struggles, addictions, and everything. Changed lives right there in Chino Valley with Chino Valley Family Church.
Yes, it's an awesome place to be, a great place to worship. It's on Highway 89 as you're coming through Chino Valley. Is it between, what exactly is it? What's the address?
It is 718 South Highway 89. It's between Road 1 and Road 2 South.
Okay.
So it's between, basically between Maverick and the feed store, Olson's Grain.
Yes.
On the left-hand side, there's a little strip mall there. We're still in that place.
Right.
We started renting a single bay, and as we grew, we took another bay and and rented another bay, and then the owner of the building, that's a whole separate miraculous story, sold us that building and the business behind it to help pay for it.
Yeah.
So we own the storage business behind that helps offset the cost of the purchase of that whole property, which we now own. Started renting there, we own the property.
Well, you know what, Pastor Lee, you have a lot of awesome stories and some amazing miracle stories.
Yes.
Would you be able to come back and talk to us again sometime?
I'd be glad to, be honored to, you bet.
I would love for you to do that because we're out of time right now, but Pastor Lee Shaw is such an amazing man, and his wife Jackie is a wonderful, godly woman. And we'll have them back another time, and we'll listen to some more incredible stories from Pastor Lee. So I'm so glad you tuned in today to get this message, and please tell your friends about it. And brother, God bless you and your ministry.
Thank you so much.
We're going to have you back soon. God bless.